So this is a video I wanted to do for a long time, and is connected to a previous video that I made, and is about workload identity federation and how to use GitHub Actions and GitHub workflows with workload identity federation. So before we start, hi, my name is Anto, and this is Out of DevOps, a YouTube channel where I talk about software engineering, continuous delivery, DevOps, a bit of everything. If you're interested, consider subscribing and don't forget the like button. So before we start with the hands-on part, I want to describe what we're going to do and what is workload identity federation. So first of all, when we have a GitHub action running on a GitHub runner, if we need to operate on cloud resources, in this specific case on GCP resources, we need to authenticate against GCP. So, and one way is to share the service account key, and sharing service account key is not ideal from a security point of view. They are not short-lived secrets, so they once created, they stay for a while until you revoke them. So, and they're a bit tricky to manage. So with workload identity federation, what we can do is we can tell Google to trust some other identities that come from another provider. When I say provider, I mean another OIDC provider, OpenID Connect provider. And these providers can be configured in Google Cloud, and we can set in the configuration specific claims where we say, okay, only the identities coming from this provider with the following attributes can access this specific service account. So, and that's what workload identity federation allows us to do. So now let's see how we can do this. Last time I did using Terraform. This time I'm gonna do fully ClickOps. So we're gonna go on the Google Cloud Console and we're gonna see how to create every single piece of this tutorial, and then also how to configure the things on GitHub side. So then let's have a look how we can do this. Let's start from the workflow definition, and I don't know if you know this trick. When you replace .com with .dev, you're gonna end up in a GitHub web editor, which is essentially Visual Studio Code. So this is very, very cool. So now what we're gonna do, we have a very similar job to similar to the one in the last video. So in this one we have a job with 4 steps. Each step is so these 4 steps are, the first one is the ID token. So we get an ID token from the GitHub API. So to get this, we need to enable the permission ID token and set this to write. And when we do this, we're gonna end up with 2 new variables in our environment. So one is actions ID token request token, and then the other one is actions ID token request URL. So this is the URL and this is the token to request our ID token. And the only other thing that we do, we specify an audience. We can pick any audience that we want. As long as it's specified on the Google side, we're gonna be fine. So I specify in this case a Google-workload identity federation. And then we do the call to the endpoint. So the endpoint is the runtime URL plus the audience. And we send a header with the authorization bearer token, which is the other variable. So once we send that, we need to extract from the JSON that returns the value, and we store that value in the ID token variable. So when we use this syntax in GitHub, set output name, we're gonna essentially create an environment variable that is accessible in the other steps. In the next step, what we do, we try to exchange the ID token from GitHub for an STS token from Google. So we send the ID token to Google, and the documentation will be linked in the description, but you can find at this link, you can find all the docs from Google that explain how to use this endpoint, what's the payload that we need to send, and for each one of these what's the different field values and what they mean. So going back to this, so once we get the STS token, essentially we exchanged our token, the ID token from GitHub, so an identity on GitHub. We exchanged that identity for an identity on Google Cloud, and at this point, if that identity is authorized to access a service account, we can request an access token for that specific service account using this identity, the new Google identity. And that's exactly what we do in the line 36 here with the step access token. So in this step, we are calling the Google API IAM credentials for a specific service account. This one is the name of the service account. And we invoke the method generate access token. So this one will return to us an access token. So for this one, there is a description as well. So if you Google IAM credentials, you will find the generate access token, but I will put the link in the description. And once we get the access token, we can validate that our access token is valid by, I don't know, if you assign permissions to that access token, you can just check the permissions. For example, if you grant access to a bucket, you can see if you have access. In this case, what I'm doing, I'm just calling the O2 endpoint, and the token info endpoint returns the specifics and of the access token that we're using. So it should tell us if that access token is valid or not. So now, this is the configuration on GitHub. What we can do, we can start our GitHub runner. So you need to have a GitHub runner running locally or in your cloud provider, wherever you want. So, and so now I'm gonna start the GitHub runner, and we're gonna check that the GitHub runner is available for this repo. So if I go back to this settings, actions, runners. So we have this one idle. So this one is waiting for jobs to be sent to it. So now let's have a look at the configuration in Google Workload Identity. So in here we have a workload identity pool. I'm gonna delete this and recreate from scratch. So in this workload identity pool, we have then a provider specified. I just want to copy this field so we can put it back, and that should be it. So now if I go and delete this entirely, how do I delete this? So I can delete the pool. So this pool is deleted. So now, oh, there's an option to restore it. Okay. So now let's test a change into our file. So let's say we modify the README file. I'm gonna add something like YouTube test. And then I'm gonna commit. So now this should trigger the build locally. Let's see if something happens. And as you may expect, the build should fail because we just deleted the pool. So now we can look at this. Well, it says succeeded because probably there is no check. But let's have a look step by step if we have any error. So when we run O2, invalid token, invalid value. So the token we are testing, which is, as you can see, null, is not valid. So now let's try to recreate this from scratch. So now that I can restore, I would like to create step by step. So if I create a pool, and I call it GitHub pool. And then we create a provider. So the provider, as we said, must be OIDC Connect. So OpenID Connect, and the provider name is GitHub. Then we put this here. Okay. So we specify the allowed audience, which is the one we have in our file here. So let's go back and go on workflows, main. We get the audience that we specified here. So this is the only one we want to allow. We put it here. So now, one other thing I want to check is, so the name instead of GitHub must be GitHub provider to make this work. You can call it the way you want as long as you keep it consistent. So GitHub provider and continue. I expect this to fail because we have the other one already created. Oh, now we need to specify the provider attributes. This is crucial, and I got lots of questions on the previous video about this. So let's put assertion sub. Assertion sub is the default claim that you have in the ID token. So let me explain what are the differences. In the GitHub documentation, there is this page where we can see we have all the claims that are sent with the token, and one of them, which is the default claim for the JOT format, is subject. So as you can see, I want to let you notice something here. So this one can change, so it's based on the repo and generally on the branch, but if you have environments enabled, you get environment. So this is nice, but the fact that this one is not always the same, so if you want to always match the branch, like references heads main, and you are on an environment, this may result different. So you may be looking for the reference, but you may end up with the environment. I know it's still confusing. Give me a few more minutes and hopefully I can make this clear. So essentially in this section here, the attributes, we can add as many attributes we want to be validated. So we can create very interesting situations where you want to only validate, you want to only accept tokens that are coming for a specific subject on a specific branch or on a specific environment, and you can mix and match all the claims that you have here, including run ready, run number, workflow. So you can have a token that is issued only for when a specific workflow is invoked. So you have all these different options here, and on top of this you can use the CEL expression language, which is an expression language to concatenate and do some operations with the different claims, which is what I did in the previous video. If you remember, I was creating an assertion dot full, something like that, where I was concatenating the repo and the branch. So in this case, we're going to start with this assertion sub, and then we're going to change it. So for now, let me save this. Let's see if we can save it. As expected, 409, we have a conflict because exactly the same configuration exists. So we can go back and just recover from the deleted one. So we have this one, restore GitHub pool, restore. So now this one has been restored, and what we can do, we can test our workflow again. So let me do another change. Let's see what happens. actions. So another one should trigger. It's already here, and we should see so now, as you can see, we got a valid token. So this token has been validated and is accepted. So now we have been able to validate our ID token and exchange that for an STS token and use the STS token to get the access token of our service account. So now let's have a look at our service account configuration, because we need to authorize the new identity to assume, impersonate the new service account. So if we go on IAM and then service accounts, so if you remember, well, we only have one, but if you remember from the workflow configuration, we have a service account specified in the IAM credentials URL. So the service account we want is this at and then the project name and then everything else, which is the same here. So this service account under permissions need to grant access to a different two identities, and we can specify when we do grant access, we can specify the identity and then select workload identity user. So when we do that and we set the principal, we have the configuration. So before I explain this, let me open back the workload identity federation. So in this, we have this configuration now, and this is the thing we are talking about. So there is an assertion sub, and this one comes from the GitHub documentation. So here, as we mentioned before, we have our subject claim. This subject claim can change, and there is a description down this page about example subject claims. So you can have different subject claims based on your configuration of the repo. So if you're using environment, you're gonna get in your subject claim this type of syntax, so you have the environment. If you're doing the pull request, so you can specify for pull request, and you can also do the same for branches, right? So if you wanna stick to a branch, you can do this, and that's what we have done because we don't have environments enabled in our GitHub. So what we have done is we expect to receive anything that looks like this. So repo name, where we have the organization and then the repo name, and then the reference, which is the branch name, and that's what we have here. We have repo, organization name, and then we have the name of the repo, and then the branch. So now this is the one that is validated when we send the request. So if we want, what we can do, we can change this assertion sub. Instead of setting assertion sub, we can set any other claim that we have here. I can set environment and we can see what happens. As I said, we don't have environments and we are not authorizing anyone with the environment specified here. So if our subject doesn't match, it won't issue any service account key. So let's validate if this is true. I'll save this and then I'm gonna run another test. So let's go here and let's modify this. We have 3. So now we should have our pipeline running, and we should have something here, test authentication. So we expect this to fail, and as you can see, there's a null. So when we try to exchange probably this failed and didn't return what we were expecting. We can have a look at this. Well, I think the authorization token is not visible, but as you can expect, this used to work, now is broken. So now let's try to do something different, which is similar to what we have done in the previous video. So instead of passing this, what we're gonna do, we can actually remove this entirely. So we make sure it won't interfere. And now we're gonna use the CEL expression language to validate specifically repo plus branch. So what we're gonna do here, we're gonna go and modify again our subject. Note that you can add multiple mappings and they all need to match. So in this case, we're gonna do assertion dot, we're gonna put two things. One is repository, then the other one is assertion dot ref. So now we expect these two to be concatenated, which is exactly what we have in the configuration for our service account. So let's double check the service account. So we have our org name plus repo, and then immediately after we have our ref heads main. Done this. So now the same script that was failing should pass now. If we add another change, so this should trigger. Let's have a look. So now we are validating our token, and the claims on our token are matching the ones we expect in our subject. So let's have a look. This one completed, and yes, so this one is working again. And now instead of validating the standard subject that, as I explained from GitHub documentation, can change based on your situation. So if you are on a pull request, you are not going to get the standard way, the standard claim. You're going to get the one with pull request. So like in this case, you're going to get different syntax every single time you are in a different event, and we may not want that. At least I don't want that. So I want to target a specific branch and stick to the branch. So that's why I changed my subject. So you can do with a number of claims, and you can modify your workload identity provider as you wish. And you can also play with the expression language, which is quite powerful. So sorry for the long video. I hope this goes in detail and answer many questions that I received from you guys. Let me know if you have other questions. If I didn't cover something, I'll try to cover in the messages, in the comments. So this is a quite tricky topic. There is lots to know, and lots to configure. It took me a while to figure out what was wrong and why it was not working. So I totally understand this can be frustrating, and thank you for watching. Hope this was useful, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.